Welcome to Nasdaq Trade Talks, where we meet with the top thought leaders and strategists in TradFi, digital assets, technology, and financial planning. I'm your host, Jill Malandrino, joined by Pradeep Goel. He's the CEO of Solve.Care, Dr. Merav Ozair, global leading emerging technologies expert, Kirthiga Reddy, co-founder and CEO of Virtualness, and Elliot Chun joins us again, architect partners, to discuss how emerging technologies like blockchain and AI could impact different types of industries and potential regulatory framework in the U.S., which of course is a hot topic within our space here. I'd like to kick it off and talk about blockchain and AI. Of course, all of you are experts within that space, but you also represent different industries and different areas of the blockchain area. So Kirthiga, let's kick it off with you. What are some of the impacts that you're seeing in different industries as a result of these emerging technologies?
Jill, so I come from the world of seeing really a region and a country going digital and mobile when I was the first employee for Facebook in India, and saw the impact that that had on creators, brands, sports, media, entertainment. I'm seeing that same wave when it comes to Web3 and blockchain, and those technologies really transforming how these stakeholders are connecting with their fans, having that direct ownership, really getting control of monetization. When it comes to the whole, if you look at the advances in Gen AI, the need for authenticated digital assets become that much more important. So now you can protect your video, your audio, your text with blockchain protection. It comes with a token ID, a contract ID that you can verify on any public blockchain. And I often equate it to, the diamond GIA certificate, which distinguishes two stones that you might not make the difference with your naked eye, but that certificate adds that few zeros to the diamond. That's the equivalent of the protection and the authenticity and trust that blockchain gives to creators. And you can build things like royalties, loyalty, community. You will be interacting with blockchain even without knowing about it.
Yeah, and Merav, that's something that you and I have covered extensively, is the authentication and the trust that blockchain brings.
Exactly. I mean, if you think about, all of these technologies, especially AI and Web3, it's all about data. And where does the data come from? At the end of the day, it's we humans create this data. So we, whether we know it or not, even a tweet, it's our data. Research is our data. I mean, whether we shop, our transactions, it's our data. We are creating this humongous data that everyone is tapping to, whether it's Web3, whether it's AI, whether it's IoT, whatever it is, it's data that is the ownership should remain with whoever created it. In terms of privacy issues, in terms of security issues, and not to mention monetization at the end of the day. If someone is now taking this data and trying to use it to create whether an ad or whatever else, or maybe even an AI model, you should give me something because you've been using my own creation, even though I'm not necessarily an artist. I don't have to be an artist or to create data because we all creators, whether we like it or not. And if you use it, even if you think about something even very simple that we never even thought about it, like if you go and shop on Amazon or any retailer, online retailers, they're using your data in order to build their AI recommendation model. So, but they're not even giving you any monetization on that. You're basically helping them to recommend.
Yeah. Well, Elliot, particularly for you, you focus on healthcare, right, primarily. And when you talk about protection of data and those types of assets of all industries, it's certainly healthcare.
Yeah, well, healthcare is one, and Pradeep, you're going to jump in at any time here. But as we think about the importance and what Kirthiga was saying, we need to be able to institute trust. None of these innovations that we have are going to work if we don't establish trust. We've tried it from early technologies and the early internet all the way through to even this last period of Web3 and moving from where we were just now to where we're going to go. It all is built on trust. And that's where I think the best part of blockchain comes in. When we think about healthcare, you think about patient data, you think about all the important things that you need to be able to do in order to interact with it. If we don't have that trust, it's not going to be used by anyone.
Absolutely. And I can add to that. And I've spent my career in healthcare, and their trust is a big issue because you have very different needs. You have a patient who needs care, You have a provider who needs to get paid, and you have an insurer who wants to pay as little as possible, but fairly, but not too much. And you have all of them orthogonal to each other. So there is no need for them to trust, because that trust doesn't exist fundamentally in the system. So if we can use something like a technology solution where I don't trust you, but I trust the system, and the system is not controlled by an individual, but by the cryptography underneath that, then it becomes a lot easier. And as a former insurance exec, I used to launch systems all the time that I would think that would benefit you as a patient, but you wouldn't trust me to use the system all the time. We would be like, hey, we launched a great system, but why don't our members use it? Because they don't trust our intentions behind it. So when you use blockchain or AI, Web3, we can begin to decouple trust from the data owner or the data custodian, and now you can trust the system, and you can actually do good for everyone.
To the point of trust, if I may.
Of course.
I always say, okay, trust, it's a big word, but how do we actually come to the point where we gain the trust of all stakeholders? So it comes from transferability, because people trust what they see and what they understand. If I don't see it, if I don't understand it, I can't trust it. That's how. So you have to gain that first. And this is why Web3 is a good way to bring that transferability to the play. And accountability, of course. I don't want being hang out, something happens and no one is accountable. Like, oh, it's a model. No, it's not the model. You created the model, or you created this app. Someone has to be responsible and someone has to be accountable. So all this technology can allow for this accountability because we know exactly who created what, when, and we have a timestamp and everything else. And on top of that, there's the audit trail. And of course, that it's tamper-free, and of course the privacy issue. So everyone is caring about the privacy and security. I don't want it to be hacked. I don't want my data to be tampered or damaged or stolen, God forbid. And the privacy, of course, that especially with the healthcare. It's very sensitive data. I don't want to share it with everybody. And this is where, digital identity that we talk about with, what they call the SSI, with the self-sovereign identity that you can have. We talked about that. And this is how, when you bring the privacy, security, transferability, and accountability, that all together brings the trust.
That's one of the things that I think is so exciting now about blockchain as a technology, is that we're moving from the speculative use case, a lot of focus on that, to the non-speculative use case or real world use cases. And so, Merav, exactly what you're talking about, we build the trust, we have the transparency, we have the accountability, and when you start seeing those use cases, the applications can span from healthcare, content creation, to integration with other technologies like AI and other things. That's the exciting part of where we are today, and what we're seeing happen in real time as we're living through it, transitioning from that speculative use case to everything else. Every other industry, every other company type, eventually will all start transitioning into this technology.
Yeah, and Elliot, is really an exciting time to be moving from that hype and the speculation to the real use cases. And what also excites me about what this trust authenticity enables, if you combine it with blockchain, is the global applicability.
Right.
It truly transcends even different currencies, where you can all converge and have something in the US be accessible in South Africa or in Southeast Asia, and vice versa. And I also see that as a huge unlock for authenticated digital goods, that it could be just digital only, it could be digital plus physical. We have the largest brands, Louis Vuitton, Prada, embracing these technologies as are consumer-focused companies like Starbucks with their loyalty programs. So it's really exciting to see the biggest brands adopting this, and a lot of times you don't even know it's blockchain that's enabling that.
Right, and that's the whole point of it. As the end user, you don't really care how you get there, as long as it functions with something that you are accustomed to. And of course, when we talk about trust in the system, it's such an arbitrary word. Everyone is so, I don't want to say negative, but so critical when it comes to trust these days. But when you start seeing it consumer facing, like Gen AI, for example, nobody was talking about ChatGPT more than a year ago, but it's consumer facing. And everyone gets how those applications work. And the fact of the matter is, Kirthiga, other areas of the world are employing these technologies right now. And as we have all discussed before, it's lack of regulatory framework
Right,
in the US.
exactly. And but it's coming. I mean, we see, the first fruits, with the executive order. What was it, last week? I think the executive order. It's not legislation per se because it's not coming from the Congress, but it's a first step. We also have the establishments of what they call the Safe AI with NIST. But the interesting part is that there was a summit also last week in the UK on safety in AI, and the UK also launched their own Safety AI Institute. The same time when the US also launched their own. But here's my point. Since we know that all these technologies are going to be global and they're going to affect us globally, and the interoperability, if you think about it, because these technologies, they don't know borders, and they don't care whether I'm American or Chinese or Indian or British or France or whatever. I just they want you want to communicate with the entire world, because that's how we're building them, basically. Mm-hmm. So the regulations, I think, just my humble opinion, should be also global. So if we already had this summit, in the UK and the Blanchie Declaration, which I think 20-something countries, signed on it, that was an opportunity, if you ask me, to create like an institute which is global institute, rather than having one in the US, one in the UK, and who knows, there's one in Europe, and then everyone is going to come with their own safety policies and regulations, and then we end up with, okay, what's next?
Well, that sounds a little bit idealistic, and in theory, I agree. But Pradeep, let's talk about this. Especially healthcare, even when it comes to financial services, there are a number of other regulations that are in place that we have to adhere to, regardless of how much everyone wants blockchain, digital assets, digital healthcare. There's just underlying regulation that we have to adhere to in the U.S.
Yeah, and there is plenty of room in the existing regulation. If you look at the practical use cases that are being implemented today, we are working on a project with a very famous, world-famous humanitarian organization that's building a care delivery network in Africa with an intent to collaborate with very specialized physicians in the US for very complex cases, with the government sponsoring that kind of a care sharing model. In this scenario, you have to have cross-border record exchange, you got to have payments, you got to have appointments, you got to have bills, all that flowing across international boundaries. Mm-hmm. And all that needs to be auditable and provable. And they need to comply to certain care model, which has to comply with the local country care model and the recommended care model, let's say, from the US institution. So to achieve all that, you could do it without blockchain, you could do it without Web3, but it's so much easier to do with it. Mm-hmm. Now, we have to comply with local regulation in Africa, local regulation to protect the provider in the US. So what? You just configure different care models and different roles, and blockchain lets you do that quite well if you have the right infrastructure. So there's another use case we're looking at, or we're working on, where people can enroll in clinical trials fully anonymously, and they can determine their eligibility and inclusion-exclusion criteria without sharing their identity at all. But they can be fully mashed up, and then they can say, you know what, I want in, and at that point in time, identity exchanges between them and their trial admin.
That's great.
Seems like a simple enough problem. It's a $50 billion a year problem. Because industry spends $50 billion a year doing this match up manually. Mm-hmm. And it is typically regional. It's typically concentrated to a country. So there are so many use cases that are currently being implemented within the regulatory framework. And as having worked in regulation, both on the receiving and the creation side, I would say regulation follows demand. You create demand for the patient, from the patient or from the provider, regulators will pay attention.
Well, regulation also follows bad actors.
Yes,
yeah,
right?
That is
exactly.
And that's probably the fundamental reason why regulation exists, is to prevent bad things from happening to people that are trying to be good actors and market participants. And so when we think about, unfortunately, we have too many examples of the bad acting coming out of this phase, but part of the challenge and part of the inertia that exists today from regulation is regulators get to point to a lot of the things that have happened and said, you got to make sure this doesn't happen again.
Again.
And then overlay that, to your point, Merav, on the globalness and the adoption globally, everyone has a different set of rules
Right.
and regulations that they need to follow given. So that's a big question that the industry needs to figure out. I don't know if it is a combined global industry group that tries to help push this forward, but until we're able to show that the new solutions that Web3 is bringing is actually doing in a regulatory compliant way and doing the things it's saying it's doing,
Yeah.
we're going to have this big topic overhanging all of us, and it's going to impede progress. Now, that being said, this is almost the biggest free capital market that we're going to see, and adoption will eventually go to places that it's
Right.
useful and
Yeah.
being used. And that's kind of the big question of, Q4 of 2023, where are we going into 2024 and beyond, is how all this plays out.
Yeah. But I think that if there is clear regulation, this is where it's going to be used because people don't like uncertainty. And this is why.
Are we going to get clear regulation?
Not necessarily, but I'm also, you said that I'm a little bit idealistic when I'm saying that. I'm not completely, yeah, maybe I'm idealistic. Well, someone has to be optimistic at some point because otherwise nothing's going to, this is how, we invent things, which we have to be, you have to think idealistic, in order to invent things. But in any event, I'm also very optimistic because, I see situations, like there's a global group of regulators, I think three countries at least, I think it's Japan, Switzerland, and Singapore. They're coming together, trying to come up with interoperable regulations that relates to Web3, to tokenizations of assets. So there are some initiatives like that, and this is why I'm optimistic that it could happen. We don't have to dismiss them completely. I know
No one's dismissing them. It's just realistically, that's 10, 20 years down the line.
I hope not. I'm trying because I think, now that we see all this evolvement that is happening very quickly, especially with AI, and also Web3 is catching up here, maybe, and the Blanchie Declaration was, declarations of 20-something countries, so maybe something will come out of it. I don't know. I'm trying to think in the way that if we maybe support that more and more of these initiatives, it might happen.
Yeah, and lack of regulation also just slows down the good actors.
Right.
Pradeep and I were talking about the initial formation of the companies took a really long time because we wanted to make sure that we were doing it right. And, so in addition to increasing the demand, it also just increases the pace for entrepreneurs.
Right.
And if you compare it at a global scale, the UAE had a minister of AI years and years ago, and we're just beginning to get that same kind of attention in the United States. So there is a lot of catch up to do here, but hopefully there's a lot of work that the other countries have done that provides
and
a
building
foundation.
companies without that regulatory framework, how has that experience been for you? Because as leaders and innovators and entrepreneurs, it's very difficult to say, hey, we want to build within the framework here, but the framework is still being built.
Totally, and you don't want to do something that unknowingly, unintentionally puts you in a place, right, which is a gray area, and then it takes that much longer and a lot of legal bills to make sure that you are working within the right boundaries.
It is difficult, and I think you have to self-regulate. You have to anticipate the intent of regulation. In healthcare, it's all about asymmetry of power. Does the patient have asymmetric disadvantage in terms of information or decisions compared to doctor or compared to the insurer? And if you can restore that symmetry, then you are on the right side of regulation. So the point here is that it's very hard when regulation is not clear, but there's an opportunity because you can look at what the intent of regulation is and say my technology or my solution will actually drive that equitable outcome. And if you can do that, then even if regulation is somewhat off and you're not 100% compliant with the letter, as long as the spirit is there, you're going to be all right for the most part. And that's the approach we took, that let's think of the regulation as it should be in the new world. How do we really protect the patient? How do we really empower patient-doctor relation to be balanced, not to have this asymmetry of power and information? And yes, the regulator will probably be on our side. but it's a risk.
And it's an opportunity then to lead the industry, but then
Absolutely.
that becomes an additional aspect that we have to be very,
Very conscious.
conscious about.
But to Pradeep's point, when you say self-regulations, but I think, it comes with being responsible, what I call responsible innovation. As an innovator, you want to create these beautiful ideas and everything, which you believe that they're going to benefit society, especially like in healthcare and other spaces. But then you think about, okay, how am I going to build it responsibly? And then going back to all the other things that we were talking about, like a trust. How can I gain the trust of the users, the regulators, all stakeholders? And this is how you start thinking, okay, I need to gain the trust, and you're already thinking in the terms of as if regulating. And that's, I think, the mindset of any inventor is supposed to be, which is, okay, I'm going to invent this, I'm going to create this, something that is going to benefit a lot of people, maybe the masses, but also how am I going to do it responsibly, and that's a trust.
Yeah. Take NFTs like specifically, right? Both of you are implementing NFTs somewhere in your business, and that happens to be a very controversial piece in the regulatory framework now. How are you thinking about responsibly, feels like both of you are doing that, responsibly implementing that, because that is, that's a key.
So, Elliot, the biggest thing that we think about when we think about doing it responsibly is making sure that it's providing real value, because that's where it starts from. Okay. And to talk then about the beauty of what this enables. So we have examples like the SAAC Autism Center that is selling digital art on the platform. And now you have an ability to know that it's authenticated, trusted from the right source, and you have an ability to trace the transactions as they change from one hand to another. Or another example, we have Taylor Lorenz, who's a Washington Post journalist and a new author who is selling her book, but that also comes with an experience where you get a behind-the-scenes audio chat. Again, all of this is traceable, and she has direct connect with the people who actually bought this experience and the ability to create. So the possibilities are truly endless, and that's where it starts.
Especially when you get to the consumer-facing end of it, where that trust is established. And with that said, Pradeep, I'm giving you the last 30 seconds.
So from my point of view, I think we have an enormous array of use cases in front of us. If you look at what's coming down the road, immediately, not way down the road, but in the next 3 years, I see an enormous impact on consumers. And when you put on the healthcare hat again, which is where I live, I see transformation in the way consumer interacts with the healthcare system. How we choose our doctors, how we choose our hospital, how we buy our prescription, how do we make our appointment, how do we evaluate risk, how do we pay for it, how do we know what the cost is going to be before we walk into the doctor's office. These are low-hanging fruit. And these are really big pain points. We walk into the doctor blind for the most part, not knowing if it's the right doctor, the right cost, what my out-of-pocket is going to be. So we have all this blind consumer behavior, which leads to a lot of frustration, cost, and pain. So I think in the technology that we have, Web3, blockchain, AI, that's the problem to solve. And the pressure, societal pressure is so great that every innovator in this space at least should be solving that issue.
All right, we appreciate the insight from everyone. I think we have another panel coming up when it comes to trusted and emerging technologies. Thanks for joining us on Trade Talks.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for joining me. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.